of you who just joined us, this is the weekly webinar from Boberdoo. We have Scott again this week. We have a lot of really big topics here lately that we're covering. So we're going to jump right in here. I know we have some other people that will be joining in, and I'll let them in as we go, but we have a lot we would like to cover. If you've been with us for the last couple of weeks, you know these have been kind of some special topics. We're going to pick up where we left off 2 weeks ago, which was where we were talking about the dynamic consent in the overall FCC rules and the various different ways that we're addressing features to accommodate all of the new rules and such. And so we talked a lot about the essence of the rules, I guess you could say, and what we were all going to have to cope with. We'll look at that real quickly and then dive right into really what amounted to just overall series of questions, both that we've received from clients over time, and then we'll also have some questions that we would like your input, you, the audience input, because they're issues that literally we are grappling with. This morning we had a team meeting, in fact, that I was listening in on, and most of it sounded pretty interesting with regard to the whole equation of the deliveries, and I'll let Scott elaborate on that. But first, Scott, if you want to bring up kind of our agenda, we'll look at that real quickly, and then we'll cover the basics of the rules just to refresh everyone's memory here.
My screen. All right. Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing well. So, as Michael mentioned here, we're going to go through a lot of questions really today. So, I know there's a lot of people on, but there's not too many that we can't have more of a fireside type of chat here. So, we have Taylor and Michael taking a look at chats with regards to questions. I don't believe we have anybody proactively muted, so feel free. This one's going to be a little bit more loose as opposed to structured. Just start with a disclaimer. We are not lawyers, so we would certainly recommend that you consult your in-house legal team regarding your specific business. Please don't take anything that we go through today as legal advice. Just a quick recap of the last call when we were talking about dynamic consent or one-to-one consent. We are talking about people that are in the lead generation industry, so lead generators that are driving traffic to a landing page for conversion, resellers, those companies that are working with other third-party vendors and the lead generators, and then also with their partners, which are sellers as defined by the FCC. So the sellers are what Boberdoo refers to as partners, and those people that are buying the lead and actually reaching out to the consumer for a sales call. And then finally, we have the leads. The leads are the people that we're talking about, typically consumers, except in the case of B2B. These are people that are submitting their information on some landing page in exchange for a quote or a consultation for some service or product. Terms, the lead generation industry, as you know, is not known for necessarily standardized terms, even with this one-to-one consent, dynamic consent, brand explicit consent, ping, pick, post. I think there was a new one that just popped out that I saw yesterday. We're all talking about the same thing. That is requiring the consumer to select the companies on a individual one-to-one basis, or who's going to get their contact information to call them. Now, who is required to do that? As our understanding is if you're using an auto dialer or a text service. If you're picking up your cell phone and calling the lead, I do not believe that the one-to-one consent is required. So we mentioned the lead, the sellers, which are the partners in Boberdoo. You may have a different name. We can customize that. But I will slip up many times and still refer to them as partners. The resellers, so brokers, lead generation company, aggregators, are all different terms that are used. Essentially, we are talking about somebody that is in the middle, which is not somebody that is generating the lead and not somebody that is calling them to sell them a product or service. As opposed to the lead generator, and that is the owner of the web property on which that consumer goes to. So again, just quick overview. Typically, a consumer is going to submit some information that will be used for matching. Also would be what is typically pinged out under the current process. Once that decisioning is done, a list of sellers are returned back to the consumer and allowing them to select which ones will get their contact information. One-to-one does not mean only one can be selected. So if you return 5 and they select 5, you can sell and route that lead to all 5 of those partners. This is where we're going to get into some of the questions left over that we didn't get to last call, and Michael's going to kind of serve me up and I'll yap about it for a little while, but please, again, feel free to shoot across a chat or even just jump in if there's something important you want to talk about.
So yeah, these questions here, I guess there's a lot of these are embedded as concerns, but certainly the one of consumers being required to do more in order to get the lead to submit, and that certainly has been raised by a lot of our clients about how that's going to affect conversion rates. Scott, how will that affect conversion rates, or will it, do you think?
Well, I think that's very vertical specific. I think that there's certainly the opportunity to actually increase revenue if you can modify as a lead generator, if you can modify your lead form and make that more about the benefits of selecting multiple companies or sellers to improve that consumer's whatever it is they're looking for. I think those lead generators that are more successful in doing that will be able to raise their overall revenue per lead, because what may currently be routed to only one, or a bid composed of 1 or 2 buyers, now has the opportunity over the long run to be selected or to have more companies selected. I think the big thing that we want to stress is that this is where testing comes in. So we've had a couple of clients that have tested and they've said the results have been very poor. It's very difficult to get them to select, and the drop-off has really been there. The drop-off has been significant. But we've had other clients where, the 80-20 rule. So 80% of them are selecting the first partner and 20% are selecting multiple ones. And then we have others in different verticals that have said, well, actually, the matching partners have increased because the average consumer is selecting more than one partner. I think that testing, and that's where we'll be able to release with 520 our new form builder. So if you are running a Google Ads, you could set up an A/B test to route a lead to that page that has dynamic consent built into it, so that you don't necessarily have to spend a lot of developer resources on your end to build a new fully functioning dynamic consent lead flow. You can use that for testing, and I think that would give an idea of how your traffic behaves as it relates to those conversion rates. Now, what to do if it is poor? I think in our last call we mentioned we will have a dynamic consent widget so that you can put that on your thank you page and not affect your current lead flow. Leave that as a one-page form or whatever it currently is, and then push that consumer to the thank you page that dynamically displays the matching partners, allowing them to select it. And then you will have options of what to do with that lead in the case that they don't select those partners.
I think the next one is directly referring to the reseller term that you showed in an earlier slide. But the cutting out the middleman, I think that's a real concern. I don't know if anyone in attendance here is a reseller, but this might be something that is a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's a hard truth that efficiencies in a marketplace are eventually squeezed out. And so the important thing is going to be for resellers is to add value. And you can do that by better understanding where those leads are coming from. And, to date, the source may work with hundreds of different sub IDs or publishers. And as you're working on optimizing your lead flow, you may block them. But in my experience with clients, they are reluctant necessarily to communicate that upstream. But I think that is going to become more important from the lead generator side. They specialize in generating leads. If they are able to work with resellers that handle the account management of the lead buyers, the billing, the refunds, the day-to-day communications and re-ups, all of that, I think that adds a lot of value because it allows the lead generators to still focus on generating the lead and not have to take on a lot of that account management that they would otherwise have to do if the reseller did not exist. Flip side, that reseller adds a lot of value to a lead buyer, especially the smaller lead buyers now, because if you did not exist, then that individual lead buyer would have to go and set up accounts find and set up accounts with all the lead generators that they could. That takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort, both in setup and ongoing management. So having a reseller that handles the relationships with those lead generators is valuable. We have clients, I don't know about a lot, we have clients that, accept pings from one wholesaler and simply ping out to another wholesaler. I do see that relationship as, eventually getting squeezed out because over the time, ultimately, if those two companies are not already working together, they eventually.
So the poaching one, this is an interesting one, kind of new problem given the new circumstances. Why don't you outline what the poaching scenario actually looks like, and then what kind of ways to remedy that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that this is one of the ones we are looking for your input on. We, like as mentioned, I think on the last call, we were working on some webinars, but how to define how to define a vendor that is a source that's pinging you just to grab different buyers to be returned in the response versus just a vendor that sends a lot of pings, which you have a low buy rate. That is, two things that can look very similar from just a numbers or traffic standpoint, but obviously can have very different, motivations behind those pings. this is where, we'll be working on webhooks, and we do have a data science team that's trying to build some historical or some more real-time alerts based off of your historical buy rates and such. But I think this is a good point to just mention Bobberdy's sister company, Assumed. So if you have concerns of a lead buyer, and I'm going to go into our lead system here very quickly. So when you have partners set up, Assumed provides you with real contacts that are used for seeded. They're seeded contacts used to vet, or in this case, know what the experience is from those sources. So when you look at a given contact, you can enter this contact as a partner in your lead system, set them up with a filter set, just like a real lead buyer. And then we would have an option to essentially post reject any leads that did match. What that would do is that would provide in the response this partner back to that vendor on some periodic basis and allow you to know if they are farming for your lead buyers, because this assumed contact that is a buyer in your system would be returned in the response, and presumably if they're using that to poach the leads, they would be reaching out to that buyer. And so you would have all of that information in your assumed contact, logging phone calls, emails, and text messages to that seeded contact. And so that helps you then just, why work with a source that's just trying to poach your buyers? So that would be one that, something that can be put in place, really might be a good idea just in general, so that what is happening with those companies that are being returned in your responses. So the next one here is related to DUNS numbers. So you see DUNS numbers being the predominant ID used to determine seller uniqueness. You might be able to guess I took the question and modified it a little bit for this webinar here. Ultimately, when you're working with resellers or the sellers, they're going to return some information back in the response. And if you are a Bobberdy client and you are sorting these responses of those individual sellers, whether those are the direct relationships or through a reseller, there has to be some sort of ID that can be used to identify one for uniqueness, so that you don't display Bradco 3 times to a consumer. It's not a very good experience. But then also, when you get back to sorting logic, one of the things that we are working on is a expected revenue per display, which factors in things like post rejects. So part of that is building new tables to log the number of times a given seller is returned in the response, selected, lead sold, and then ultimately that may be again through a direct relationship or through a reseller relationship. So we've kicked around DUNS numbers. I know Brad has had lots of difficulties on Reach. They're talking about trying to implement that, but as one for the team or for the people here, is that a viable solution from your business? Do you think you could get a unique DUNS number? Do the people that you sell leads for even have DUNS numbers? And if not, sorry again. And if not, what is the backup? So, we can build dependent logic. We are working on right now using DUNS number because that's the only unique one that we have. And then a fallback. So the working solution is to fall back on a name and to build some smart checks in there. But I personally have concerns about the industry standardizing a partner name to be returned in a response and to be used. I think that something more reliable in terms of a unique ID is the way to go. I would say that would be certainly something to think about. We'd love to hear your input on that as well. Name can be tough.
Yeah, a lot of different ways and variations to spell and things like that in an environment that is case sensitive and very, very detail oriented. So let's talk about this next one, worded just as our client pretty much worded it with regard to the 3 sellers shown and the matching just to 1 and that satisfying the rules.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting question. There's been a lot of clients that say like, well, we sell leads exclusively. We don't sell leads non-exclusively. And I think that there'll be a lot of things that change. We talked about, vendor, reseller, lead generator relationships or lead reseller, seller relationships having to change. I think that lead generators also should revisit their flow because there may be opportunities. As I understand how this question was worded, is that you are going to show 3 sellers to the consumer, allow the seller to select 3 sellers, but then only pick one of those 3 to sell it to. I get that so that you're kind of proactively, I guess, booking a backup use case in the case of a post reject or something like that. But I would say that it could be a loss of revenue opportunity if that consumer specifically selects 3 sellers, and you can then get rev cases. But something like this is going to be a more sophisticated logic because, if you do have a buyer that is post rejecting a lot of leads, do you even want to waste that valuable real estate in your response to be presented back to the consumer? I would make the argument no. If somebody's post rejecting 50% of their leads, they may pay a premium on the other 50%, but that's 0 revenue on the other ones. So when you look at things like expected revenue per display, that processing logic would automatically sort out that high post reject buyer in favor of somebody who may be bidding less, but accepts more leads on the post.
Well, I think you answered at least partially the next one about, and this was a question I think everyone had right as the rule came out. That was the first thing that we kept hearing over and over again is the best revenue scenario, ping post dead. I think the dust has settled on that one.
Yeah, in the case of one-to-one consent, the answer is yes. I think you are no longer bidding for the lead as a whole. You are bidding on behalf of, in the case of a reseller, you are bidding on behalf of your buyer, of your partner, excuse me. So you are returning 5 companies with a bid for each one of those companies. And the consumer, well, both the lead generator may choose or not choose to display your information, and then the consumer may choose or not choose to give that one-to-one consent. Um, Now, best revenue scenario for ping post where one-to-one consent is not required. Yeah, that would still continue to operate as normal. Conceivably, uh, you could ping it out. You could get your dynamic if you did not have any um, one-to-one buyers that required, or excuse me, buyers that required that one-to-one consent. Or in the case of collecting the full lead form before presenting the sellers that to the consumer, that lead can be sold via a best revenue scenario.
Before we get into that final one, which I think is going to be the longer answer, Sam popped one into the chat that I think is a shorter answer regarding, I guess there's some discussion out there about the FCC's final ruling being delayed. I assume they're talking about the date in which it's in effect. I don't know that an actual date was ever established, and so I guess that would be partly contributing to that.
Yeah, I mean, when it first rolled out, it was more of I think it was like June of this year was the target, and then they did delay it officially 6 months, and then if I remember correctly, last week, you'll forgive me, my days run together. I think it was last week. It was, or maybe the week before. I believe it is January 25th, 2025 is the official date. But if you'll bear with me a second, I will. Yeah, July 25th.
All right.
Assuming I did not put the date wrong in my calendar, which is certainly possible.
All right. Now the forms. I think this is a bigger topic. Short question, long answer.
I mean, with the way the question, is there a way to escape rebuilding all the life forms? Yes, with the but, no with the well. So you can escape building all the life forms, and when we look at our home model website, and if he types the right website in, so our widget is designed to go after the form fill. So it is specifically for people that are trying to not adjust their current flow. And this is assuming your current flow is just a one-page, form. The JavaScript sits on the thank you page or the confirmation page, and then pulls in the ping ID to display the dynamic matching partners to this request in the same way that what will be the standard dynamic consent does so. So the idea here is that this could be returned on your confirmation page. So in that regard, your front end form, first page, one page form doesn't change at all. But of course, then the question becomes, well, you have a lead in your system now that is sitting with a consent pending status and is waiting for this consumer to select these companies. What happens if they don't? And so if they do not select any companies, presumably you have the full lead information. You could remarket them back to this if every single one of your buyers required one-to-one consent. You would be able to, remarket to them, try to drive them back to this page to select companies. Alternatively, if the lead was in the system itself and you had buyers that did not require one-to-one consent, we are building in essentially a timer so that at the end, if that lead is in the review status or pending status, consent pending status, that timer hits and the system will automatically reprocess that lead to partners that do not require a one-to-one consent. But all of that being said, I think that you limit your revenue opportunities in that case because you can only sell the lead to people that do not require that one-to-one consent. And then, of course, there's the question, temptation of having a full lead in that you paid a lot of money, spent a lot of time and resources and effort driving them to a landing page, converting them, and then you have that asset sitting in your pending status that you can't get any revenue from. I think at the very least it's worth testing, A/B testing, what the effects are of moving that decision up before you collect the full lead.
Okay, so I think that covers most of the common questions we were getting from clients and such, and then we move into the experimental phase of our presentation here. We're not sure exactly how this is going to go in terms of getting feedback from you all, the audience, and all that. But these are questions that we've been grappling with that we can go into. I think Scott, probably you should just go into.
More. Yeah, we actually have a couple more client ones here, Michael.
Oh, I thought we were.
We did cover a lot of these, but there's a couple that I would want to touch on.
Yeah, forgive me. Go ahead.
Oh, no problem. So this, I thought, I know, like the what happens when consumers do their own research based off of the information that you provide them. So, you don't want to give away free advertising. It's a great point. So that's where multiple monetization opportunities in the response will be included. So, for example, you can track route and bill for calls and clicks with boberdoo right now. So you can provide a trackable number through boberdoo, have them call or text. We're testing out text versus call, some options here. But if they're going to pick up the Google that number, pick up the phone and call, save them 2 steps and clicks, give them the number to call right there. Similarly, if they're going to Google so they can go to the website, you can provide their website or landing page and make that a billable event, clicking on that lead. And so that gives you the ability then to monetize the research in addition to the end lead itself. Sorry, I'll keep this out of here. So we did touch on the exceptions for buyers that don't require one-to-one consent, and presumably that lead could be sent to them. So that is something, that flow can continue as is. We talked a little bit about reprocess options in the case that you're going to direct the consumer to a widget to try and get that one-to-one consent. This kind of also speaks to the consent aspect of it. So reprocessing leads, presumably to a non one-to-one consent partner. But I think when you look at the reprocessing, so in real time what happens on that lead. So you have the lead coming in with specific one-to-one sellers that they're going to be matched with. You either complete that transaction in real time or your buyer post rejects. Those are really the two options that happen at that point. If you post reject it and there's no additional buyers and you're the lead generator, that is the use case for driving them back to that confirmation page that has the widget on it to display a new set of partners. Again, trying to get them to give consent. And then if there are no matches on the ping, so with 520, we will have a new version of our form builder that includes dynamic consent as a type option. And so there will be a lot more options based on what happens on that ping. So we will have options for you to set what to do if there are no matches on the ping. We're envisioning the most common use case there being that you have a click-only buyer. So you ping in, there's no matches. We can redirect that consumer, very similar to redirecting them off of a click here to your buyer who's just buying clicks. So you could just, any unmatched ping, you could then redirect them as a way to monetize it. But then there will be options for an exclusive match versus a non-exclusive match, namely whether you're looking to embed the dynamic matching partner of an exclusive match in the TCPA text, or return multiple partners for the consumer to select. So the next one, as far as partners getting leads as email, I think that is, it's interesting. We have GDPR parameters for UK and the non-US leads, and HTML is not an allowed delivery or text or a non-password protected email. It is not considered a secure delivery. You could still deliver the lead via API, or excuse me, PDF, for example, password protected. But ultimately, their partners are either going to need to have a CRM to ingest these leads so they can be done securely, or something that is password protected. Negative effects of one-to-one consent on small businesses. I know a lot of people have touched on that and talked on that more eloquently than I ever could. The one thing I would say is, if you do work with small businesses, the part of that response is going to be an HTML offer that you can use to try and provide a value proposition for that seller to the consumer. So it's going to be an HTML, things like logos or taglines, discounts, things like that. And going all the way back to one of Michael's first questions about, what's going to change. And as far as the relationships between a buyer and a seller, a buyer and a reseller, you're going to want to get some more information like this so that you can improve their chances of being selected by the consumer. And then the last one here, call aggregators who buy and sell consumer phone calls. I guess the one thing that I would touch on here is that I know a lot of calls are generated initially by an outbound call from a call center. And so while it is an inbound call that is being routed, it is often started by an outbound call. So I think as an aggregator, truly understanding where those calls are coming from is going to be super important, especially when you're working with maybe an aggregator that has multiple call centers. So I think that's another use case for having a process for vetting a new vendor coming into your system that you're going to work with, so that you can document and understand, what is the experience of a consumer that goes through that flow.
All right, now the part that I jumped the gun on. I can tell what part I was looking forward to the most. So these, do you want to just hit on these, kind of describe what our thoughts were, and hopefully we can get some input from the group.
Yeah, so these are questions for you. We're talking with our clients individually on this, but if you have any thoughts, please let us know, email, or if you want to set up a call. But we talked about selling a lead, for one-to-one consent or non-one-to-one consent if that's not required by the partners. When you envision yourself working with a vendor, a reseller, would you see them as setting up a relationship for both dynamic consent and standard lead distribution within the same lead type? Or do you envision these being separated so that a dynamic take home improvement, for example, you would have a home improvement one-to-one and home improvement standard as two different lead types that are essentially managed completely separately? Or do you see yourself having one vendor, one relationship with your vendor? They may provide both standard leads and one-to-one leads within the same flow, more on a lead-by-lead basis.
That's a lot to take in, so maybe we can get some feedback either later on here. But
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So some people are using the chat here to provide some tailored submitted. A vendor could provide either. I know, Scott, you're not looking at the chats because you got a lot of other things going on your screen there. So
yeah, I mean, if the vendor, right, theoretically, a vendor could provide either. The way we're working so far is that you would have two different sources. One would be, ABC, and then ABC one-to-one or dynamic consent or dynamic, something like that, to differentiate. So when they collected one-to-one consent, it would be sent through one source, and then a separate source if it is the standard lead distribution. And I think it would ultimately, when you're looking at your filter sets for your buyers, right? For illustrative purposes here, we're just doing one-to-one consent as far as a label, but those will be driven down to the individual filter sets to be managed separately.
Well, Taylor followed up with, so managing them in one place would be helpful. Then you could filter by either type if you wanted to look at them separately.
So yeah, I think that works then as far as what we're thinking, Taylor, in terms of it being source related, so that you would then be able to follow all of your same filtering, reporting that you currently follow. So it would be very similar to current setup where they're paying exclusive and non-exclusive through two separate sources, so that you can build two separate best revenue areas.
You got a thumbs up from Taylor. And if you want, you can unmute yourself, even if you just want to throw a quick question. I see Shane, you go ahead. Okay. Do you want to move on to the next bullet item then?
Yeah, so these next two, I hope I explained them clearly. We're kind of working through the logic on these right now. So many of you know we have outside services that is built to make a third-party API call using your credentials and then using the third party's response in the decisioning, typically to post, reject, delete, continue processing. When we look at 2025, that end seller is going to have to claim that certificate themselves. And so my first question for it would be, many of you that are currently claiming those certificates, do you see yourself continuing to claim them? Or is that no longer necessary? And then, or even can you? And then two, presumably Drenai and trusted forms are going to, will you have to claim this certificate on behalf of your partners? So, let's say your partner just gets a direct post into a homemade CRM. If they do not have a methodology of claiming that certificate, I believe they're all time bound, so you can't just claim them whenever you need it. And the reason that we bring this up is because the outside services is currently built to use your credentials as our client, but we are scoping out if you are going to have to claim the certificate on behalf of an end lead buyer using their credentials, what that would look like. So anybody that's I think specifically selling with an email delivery, for example, we can be pretty confident that they're not claiming that certificate. But I don't know as far as what the flows are in other CRMs. So if anybody has any thoughts or feedback on that, I'd love to hear it. And then the next one is also an interesting scenario that we've been kicking around. So you are selling leads directly to Bradco. Bradco post rejects a lot of leads in your direct relationship. You will also work with a reseller, and in their response, amongst other sellers, they return Bradco. When you look at that response from the reseller, would you want to factor in the post reject rate of your direct relationship with Bradco? Namely, we talked about before, sorting and pushing these companies that post reject a lot of leads down so that they are displayed less. The question is, would you want to apply the previous or historical data from Bradco in your direct relationship to a new relationship in the case of like a reseller? This one we're kind of torn on. I've seen, we've had both yay and nay there. But this kind of goes back to that seller logging and tables that we're building because, are we logging Bradco and, how much of that historical data that in your direct relationship would you want to apply to a new?
Yeah, a lot going on there.
So I probably their end sellers so that we're taking that into account. So every new seller that's returned in the reseller's response gets added to a table and started to be logged. And so that's the reason for that question.
Okay. I think that pretty much wraps it up, Scott, other than just the webinars that we're always looking for new topics.
Yeah, topics. We're always looking for more webinar topics, especially if something's important. So if you can, shoot us an email or jump on chat, any way you take it, however you'd like to get it, we'd love to hear it.
The Wednesday webinars is a weekly thing. We'll always hold this slot and have something here. Our fallback is to just go into a general overview of the system as if you were a new client or a new user, which we found doing that on a weekly basis. Inevitably, we'll get at least one client that has a new employee that they bring the new employee in there for an orientation. So we do that every week. But if we get hot topics, like certainly the FCC's been one, we've got some other ones coming up that you can watch your inboxes for. We'll certainly do these special topics as they're warranted. But otherwise, that does it for the weekly webinar. We've got a few minutes left, technically 8 minutes. We could open up for just general Q&A. If anyone has anything, feel free to unmute or use the chat. Otherwise, I think Scott and I will hang out here just to wrap things up. So we'll just open up the mics.
Hey, guys. Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I might have missed it. You probably said it, but when did you expect 5.2 to be released?
520, we will hopefully we'll get it done mid-March, realistically by the end of March.
Cool. Thank you.
All right.
We have another chat from Taylor again. Once a lead puts in their address, can we use your magic string to populate the top exclusive bidding buyer for that matching address?
Yes. The short answer is yes. When we are looking at the responses, we can either return multiple matches, in this case here, or we have an example on home model here. If there is this, you can grab it and parse that into your lead form however you want.